Background information. I own a restaurant chain. We have 3 restaurants in my city, and 2 in a neighboring city, which is also my hometown. My office is in the most popular restaurant, which was also the first one I ever opened. And the managers usually look after the other chains. I go in for a random inspection every once in a while. However, my employees are really capable, so I don't have to worry about them too much. Right after Christmas, my friends from school immediately made plans for a reunion party. It was on short notice, but I hadn't met them in quite some time, so I happily agreed to come. New Year's, too, was approaching as well, so I thought it would be nice to spend the week at my parents' house. We had a reunion the next day, and it was fun. However, I have been a workaholic for the last 4 years, so I didn't really want to spend my time at home. It was 2 days before New Year's Eve, so I thought of helping out in the restaurant. This was our newest chain, and I hadn't been there to check on things for the last 3 months. The reason for my 3-month delay visit was that I had been involved in a car accident and broke my right leg. The general manager had been taking care of the inspection and everything in my place. I quickly wore my casual clothes and drove to the restaurant. As soon as the manager saw me, he hurriedly walked up to me and asked what I was doing. I told him that I was there to help out in the restaurant, and he took a deep breath and said, "Just in time." Apparently, we were having a bit of a crisis in the restaurant. There was much more crowd than expected, and we were visibly understaffed. I told the manager not to worry and not to tell anyone about me. I did this because there were some new hires, and I wanted to observe their behavior and abilities. This was a practice that I always followed. Every time there were new hires, I would go as a customer and check their attitude, behavior, and overall service. If I found something lacking, I would give them tips and ask them what I could do to help them. So, I wore the uniform and got to work. I put on my best smile and quickly took orders and served customers. When they were leaving, I asked for feedback and what they thought could be better. Soon I was making really good tips. I had been in this business for years, so I knew how to treat a customer properly. I wanted to take a short break, so I told the manager I was going out for a smoke and will be returning in 10 minutes or so. As soon as I walked out the back door, I felt a hand tightly gripping my wrist. When I turned, I saw an unfamiliar face. She must have been the new hire, I thought. The manager had told me earlier about the assistant manager who was hired for the role. The new restaurant had only been open for 5 months, so I wasn't in charge of the selection of the assistant manager. This was a position that was added later once we began getting a lot of customers. The manager had told me that the general manager took the interview and the new assistant manager was selected based on their experience. However, within a month or 2, they started getting complaints from customers and staff about the assistant manager. This was one of the major reasons why I wanted to check the new place. I was having so much fun at work that I had completely forgotten to observe other workers. However, I didn't think she wasn't good at her job because if she had been, there must have been some sort of fuss. Everything was going on pretty smoothly. I asked in a calm manner, "May I help you?" She just rolled her eyes and asked, "New hire, huh?" I didn't want to blow my cover, so I nodded in agreement and asked her if she wanted anything. She took one heavy sigh and told me to hand over all the money I made. So, just to clarify, we pay more than minimum wage, and there has been no restriction on tips. If a server is tipped, it's their own money to keep. That's why when she asked for my tip money, I couldn't understand why she did that. No, I don't think so. I freed my wrist from her hand and started walking towards the alley. Suddenly, I felt someone aggressively grabbing my arms. I turned and asked her what the hell she thought she was doing, and she pushed me and asked me for my money again. I had always done a check on how servers were with the customers, but I didn't know if the servers had any issues among themselves. "Why should I have to give you anything?" I asked. She angrily replied, "It's because you barged in all of a sudden and made all the tips that actually belong to me. You are not allowed to have these tips, and in any case you didn't know, I am the assistant manager here, so you have to hand over all those tips to me." I've seen a lot of nonsensical people in the past, but I had never seen someone demanding the money that I made on my own, especially when I'm allowed to keep the money. "I don't think so," I told her. I wouldn't give her any money because the customers had exclusively paid me for my service, so it wouldn't make any sense to give it to someone who wasn't present. She looked at me furiously and started touching my pockets without my consent. I pushed her a little and asked her what she was doing. I don't care what you think. I am taking what's mine. I have every right over that penny. You know? Unlike you, I have been busting my ass for months and now you walk in and take all the money I should have been making? You have been here 1 day. 1 day. You are just a busser. You aren't even a proper server. How dare you take my money? She looked so violent for a second I was actually scared. I removed her hand from my arm and told her that if she had any issues, she should have taken it to the manager and waited for the verdict. I'd happily oblige, but you need to really tell me why you're trying to take my money, I told her. She turned and slammed shut the back door. You should be good to your assistant manager. You are breaking rules, you know. Give it or I will have you fired, she smugly said. Okay, fire me then. Go ahead. I was chosen by the manager himself, so I would like to be fired by him. She looked frightened. I knew that she was well aware of the fact that I wasn't doing anything wrong. She nervously looked up and down and warned me one last time before opening the door and leaving. After a smoke, I went back inside. Everyone was staring at me. I understood that it was possible that everyone knew that I had an argument with a crazy person. I texted the manager to meet me after the closing time. I went in and did my job like I was supposed to, and I received a handful of tips. It was one of the highest I had made on a regular day. The manager texted me back, and we decided to meet in a cafe nearby. And after closing the place, we walked to the cafe, and I told him everything. He was shocked. He told me that he had already asked some of the other servers if they had any issues with the assistant manager, but no one stepped forward. There was only one complaint from a man who left the job within a week. According to him, the assistant manager tried to collect his tips and she emphasized that they were paid above minimum wage so the tips should be given to the restaurant, or more specifically, her. However, when the manager questioned the staff, nobody accepted. They didn't deny it either, so the manager thought the worker must have misunderstood the assistant manager and decided to quit on a whim. I was dumbfounded and didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath and told the manager to ask the assistant manager to join for a special meeting. I asked him to tell all the servers to join as well. The next day, everyone arrived and I waited outside the restaurant. Once everyone was seated, I entered the room. Very telenovela-like, I know. I sat in the seat next to the manager and smiled at the assistant manager. We've received a complaint, the manager said. Before he could say another word, the assistant manager cut him short and yelled that I was the only one at fault. She started lying that I tackled her when she asked how much I made in tips because she was curious. It was indeed a very serious accusation, and I don't think she undertook the severity of it. I told my side of the story in great detail and watched the assistant manager angrily glowering at me. Everyone was silent, and somehow their faces revealed that they had known the situation all too well. Did you all have similar experiences? The manager asked the staff, but nobody dared to speak once they saw the assistant manager's face. I knew it was important for the truth to come out, so I added, "You don't have to worry. We have your back. You should know that." At this point, Karen flipped the files in front of her and screamed what right I had to speak like that. "You have only been here 1 day, and we have started having problems suddenly. Fire her immediately, manager," she cried. I stood up, tore the badge off Karen's shirt, and announced that she was no more liable to be a member of the staff. Everyone looked surprised. She gritted her teeth and was about to throw a fit when I said, "Hi, I'm the owner of the restaurant chain. I had to come to town for a short visit and wanted to check the restaurant. My leg was broken, so forgive me for being a little late and not firing you earlier. You're free to leave. If you show any signs of physical harassment, I will call the cops and hand you over to them in a heartbeat. I have videos and statements of the other staff to prove that you were bullying and forcefully making tip money from the servers." She was stunned and kept looking back and forth at the manager and me. It was evident from her face that she was deeply regretting her actions. Everyone was happy. that were obviously revealed and started telling how the assistant manager bullied them. She begged the manager to do something, and she kept going on and on about how we cheated her because she didn't know I was the owner. It was clear that she didn't understand why she was fired. I asked the security to take her out of the restaurant and banned her from entering any of our restaurant chains forever. She kept yelling how she deserved the tips because she was above the staff, and it wasn't fair for the servers to earn more by making tips when she couldn't. I stood in front of her and replied, "I don't care what you think," and walked away. Very satisfying. Okay, so back in the mid-90s, I was a single guy in my late 20s. I was a man-child, I admit. I was working, but just enough to pay rent and go drinking every night. I have since gotten married and kids and house and yada yada yada. Anyway, there were these two ladies my age at the bar where I was a regular, who just had their roommate move out abruptly. I was looking to move to something cheaper, and this place was a unicorn. $350 a month for a 3-bedroom place. Close to everything. It wasn't the greatest place, but far from horrible. That's $350 divided 3 ways. Plus, the heat and electric were paid for by the doctor's office below us. I was paying that alone plus utilities, so hell yeah, I moved in. So, day 1, and the ladies had me sign the lease. I knew it was kind of bullcrap right away, as they had a copy of the lease with the old roommate's name, whited out, and had me sign. I was never to contact the landlord myself. Sus? Sure, whatever. Here's $200 for the deposit and the first month's rent. The ladies were a bit quirky. They were lazy. Sure, they were fun and all, but they seemed to think they owned me. They'd ask me where I had been, who I was dating, why I didn't get in until 6 a.m. I worked a swing shift. Lots of little things like being on AOL Instant Messenger, no cell phones at this point, all night and day, tying up the phone lines, leaving garbage and other crap in the common areas, dirty dishes, etc. I actually didn't really care, except they would have the nerve to scold me for leaving out my shoes or coat or whatever in the middle of their mess. I made a point of never leaving my stuff out, but occasionally I would, and they would mention it. Plus, a cousin of one of the roommates stayed there for 2 to 5 times a week, which, again, was annoying, but whatever. Rent was cheap and I barely saw them. The best part is they would be in passive-aggressive notes like, "Hey, please don't leave your shoes out by the couch. I almost tripped on them this morning." There was clutter everywhere, and they'd be complaining about my shoes. They'd have weeks' worth of dishes everywhere, and my shoes were the problem? Okay, whatever. I could write a book about the crazy, but let's move on. It got really bad when I met the person that became my wife. They were a bit jealous and tried to regularly break us up. She called one morning. The ring woke me up. The ladies answered the phone saying that I never came home last night after meeting some girl at the bar. I called her later and she told me this, laughing the whole time. She knew it was bullcrap since she dropped me off for the night shift the night before. There were a lot of similar stories like this, but on to the main story. The lease was up in a month, and they decided to get another apartment, and I would have to move out. I asked if I could take over the rent, and they said that the landlord already leased it to someone else. Okay, sure. So I finally called the landlord myself. She tells me that she only knew I was living there because she got my check every month. I made them out to cash, and the roommates were too lazy to cash the checks beforehand. She said that no, she has not leased out the apartment and hadn't gotten any notice from the ladies that they were moving out yet. But the one cousin that stayed over often was wanting to sign. It was obvious to me that the landlord did not like these women, and I asked if I could have first. Furthermore, they were trying to steal the lease from under me and give it to the cousin. I asked and received a letter from her giving me first dibs on the apartment. A couple of days later, I come home from my shift and there was an open mail on the table to me from the landlord with the first dibs letter sitting there. They opened my mail, along with a bitter 3-page note about how could I do this to them? Why did I contact the landlord? I'm a horrible person, etc. I laughed and read it to my now girlfriend and future wife. She laughed along with me. The next few weeks were cold. One-word answers to questions, no mention of the note or moving out. They did give notice, and I promptly signed a real lease with only my name on it and paid 3 months up front just because I could. A few weeks later, I came home to find 3 bags of garbage and 2 empty rooms. They were gone. I had a 3-bedroom apartment to myself for $350 a month. Oh, the after-hour parties we had. I lived there for 2 more years, one as a married man with a kid on the way. We sadly had to get a better place, and I had to give up my unicorn apartment, but I'll never forget screwing them over before they could do it to me. I had twin nieces, and a couple of years ago, I donated a kidney to one of them. As a result of the surgery, I have substantial abdominal scarring. I don't let that bother me, and I don't cover it up. So my nieces came to stay. My wife took a day off of work, and we all went to the pool. We're all just chilling in the jacuzzi area. I get up and go to the bathroom. When I came back, I noticed these young women staring at me. Then they started talking loudly and laughing. I have a slight hearing impairment, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but my nieces could. The next minute, niece 1 starts crying. I asked her what's wrong, and it was because these women were laughing about my scars. As a transplant recipient, she has more scarring than me, and she's self-conscious about it. Niece 2 hears all of this and decides to start crying as well. My wife heard too and confirmed that this is what was said. So now I have 2 upset kids to deal with. They want to leave, so we send them off to get changed. Meanwhile, I go and talk to one of the lifeguards and say, I'd like to see the center manager. He happens to be an old flatmate of mine, and we work on some charity stuff together. He comes down, and my wife and I explain what happened. He goes over and talks to the women, writes very few things down in his notebook. They all leave looking very pissed off, and he comes back over. He's banned them for 3 months from the facility, including the gym.